Logan McAllister could still smell the tang of hot metal and scorched paint in the crisp night air. It lingered in the small town of El Fuego Springs like a ghostly reminder that, in this place, playing with fire was not merely a pastime, but a passion. He took a steadying breath and ran a hand through his short, ash-blonde hair, feeling flakes of burnt debris fall away. This was supposed to be the grand evening of Flame Fest, the annual celebration where the whole town gathered to show off their homemade flamethrowers, fireworks contraptions, and other wild pyrotechnic inventions. He had been preparing his prized custom-built flamethrower for months, eager to outdo everyone. Yet no one could have predicted that real aliens, calling themselves the Pyronics, would crash the party with a boastful claim. They were the undisputed masters of fire, and Earth was about to learn its place. In El Fuego Springs, fire was something of a civic religion. Wedged between a sprawling desert and a patch of scraggly farmland, the place earned its name from the hot springs that bubbled nearby. The area was infamous for scorching summers. The local residents joked that they stayed not because they were fond of the heat, but because they were too proud to leave. Every April, the mayor's office co-sponsored Flame Fest, a week-long extravaganza of all things flammable. People paraded around in flame-patterned outfits, swapped homemade recipes for rocket fuel, and spent late nights launching fireworks that turned the desert sky into a chaos of color. For Logan, it was the highlight of the year. He had grown up in the workshop of Stan Halliday, known simply as Mr. Stan to folks around town, a gruff older man with thick arms and a permanent odor of WD-40. Mr. Stan had taught Logan to weld at age 10, to keep a blowtorch safe and secure, or at least as safe as possible. At age 11, and to treat fire not as an enemy, but as an untamed ally that could be harnessed with a steady hand and a fearless heart. Logan soaked up every piece of knowledge he could, discovering that nothing thrilled him more than seeing sparks fly beneath his welding visor or igniting a new contraption. His best friend Becca, a slim, sharp-witted chemistry genius, was the one who turned Logan's mechanical shell into a weapon of terrifying brilliance. She spent her days working in a small lab attached to the local feed store, formulating new types of fuels and adhesives for industrial clients. Secretly, she also fiddled with more volatile blends, delighting in the mental challenge of controlling violent chemical reactions. It was she who had refined the latest homemade fuel known as Pyro-Spark X, a mixture so potent it could burn blue at a temperature that would melt steel if given enough time. Tonight, she had come to the festival in her patched denim jacket, sporting a pin that read, "Science," because fire isn't scary enough. When the first alien ship tore across the sky, it was midnight, and the distant desert horizon glowed with the flicker of bonfires. Logan stood on a makeshift stage, demonstrating the searing force of his new flamethrower. Flame shot 20 feet into the air, to a roar of approval. Moments later, the crowd's cheers died as something much larger and brighter carved a path overhead, something that definitely wasn't a meteor. The object slammed into the dusty ground a few miles past the festival perimeter, kicking up a plume of sand visible even from town. People exchanged uneasy glances. Was it a plane crash? A satellite? The local volunteer firefighters hopped into their trucks, joined by a few curious townsfolk who decided it was worth investigating. Logan and Becca, adrenaline pumping, climbed into Mr. Stan's battered old pickup. Mr. Stan himself slid behind the wheel, muttering something about damn fools probably crash-landed a secret experimental aircraft. The truck's engine coughed to life, and they sped off along the dirt road into the desert. As they neared the impact site, the vibrations from the collision settled, leaving a stillness that was almost eerie. A massive metallic pod sat half-buried in the sand, its outer plating scorched from atmospheric re-entry. Steam rose from vents along its surface. Logan and Becca disembarked, flamethrower and toolbox in tow. The volunteer firefighters aimed their headlights at the pod. Several onlookers hovered at a safer distance, phones out, recording. Then the pod hissed, a strange mechanical exhalation, and a door slid open. Out stepped a tall figure encased in armor that glowed faintly red, as if each plate were heated from within. The being's posture was rigid, its helmet sporting an array of vents reminiscent of a furnace grate. It gazed at the humans with an unmistakable air of superiority, then raised a gauntlet hand and spoke in a resonant, translated voice. Bow before the Pyronex. We are the masters of fire, and this world is now ours. There was a long pause. In El Fuego Springs, not many folks bowed to strangers, even less so when those strangers demanded it. Some of the volunteer firefighters exchanged confused looks, while others gripped their hoses as if uncertain whether to extinguish or to defend. "Mister," Stan snorted, "Masters of Fire? You're a little late to that party." Logan swallowed hard. He could hear his heart thumping, but he was also oddly excited. "Hey, big guy," he said, stepping forward. "You might want to check your definition of master. We've been busy with fire for a good while, and we're just warming up." The alien soldier twisted its helmet, a motion reminiscent of narrowing its eyes. "You dare challenge the Pyronex? My name is Skoriakel, and I was dispatched to scout your world. We see your rudimentary flickers of flame from orbit. We suspect you are no threat at all." With a snap of the alien's fingers, a thin streak of superheated plasma erupted from a small weapon on its wrist, scorching the nearby sand into a molten puddle. Several humans jumped back, muttering expletives. Logan, still holding his flamethrower, took a silent step closer. Becca shot him a worried glance, but Logan's mind was made up. "Let me show you something about this rudimentary flicker," he said. He hoisted his homemade device onto his shoulder, fueled by Pyrospark X, and pressed the ignition. A torrent of searing, bluish flame burst forth, lighting up the desert night in an otherworldly glow. For a split second, Skoriakel flinched. He clearly hadn't expected humans to produce that kind of heat or with such a concentrated column of fire. Then the alien soldier recovered. "Impressive for a savage," Skoriakel growled, "but it is nothing compared to the Pyronex." The figure pressed a button on the side of the pod, and a column of sparks erupted into the sky, signaling others. "Soon, the entire landing force will descend. Prepare yourselves for conquest or immolation." With that, the soldier marched back into the darkness. Logan considered chasing him, but Mr. Stan's hand on his shoulder held him back. "Not yet, kid," he muttered. "Let's live to fight the bigger wave." That was just the opener. They returned to the festival grounds with the story spreading like wildfire. Everyone who heard about it was half alarmed, half intrigued. They thought Flame Fest was intense already, but real aliens claiming mastery over fire? That was something new. The mayor tried to contact state authorities, but only got through to a baffled dispatcher. A sense of foreboding hung over the entire town, even as people tried to continue the festivities. Logan found himself pacing near a row of booths that displayed homemade pyrotechnic gear, scanning the sky for incoming ships. Becca caught up to him, her eyes shining with both fear and excitement. "We've got to prepare. If these Pyronex are half as bad as they claim, they'll come in force." Logan nodded. "We need to gather as many folks as possible who know how to handle the kind of flames we produce. Honestly, we might be the only town in the country weird enough to stand chance." An hour later, the next wave arrived. For gleaming triangular craft soared overhead, each trailing an aura of shimmering heat. They circled the outskirts of El Fuego Springs before descending near the old airstrip, where they began unloading. Mr. Stan and a half-dozen fearless volunteers hopped in trucks to get a closer look, while Logan stayed behind to gather the best weaponry the festival had to offer. He found a ragtag group of enthusiastic participants. Toby, who had an industrial flamethrower meant for clearing brush. Rita, an ex-military mechanic who'd built a device that heated oil to explosive temperatures, and a handful of local pyro hobbyists who had fancy blowtorches, homemade rocket launchers, and some questionable barrels labeled "Warning, Flammable." It was a bizarre sight. The entire arsenal looked like it belonged in an underground fireworks show rather than a legitimate defensive force. But the looming threat of an alien invasion was real, and they intended to fight fire with bigger, badder fire. They set up a command point in the dusty courtyard behind the feed store. Becca spread out her notes on PyroSparkX. This formula can burn through steel if we concentrate it. But we need better nozzles, or we'll blow ourselves up. Rita tapped her chin. We can salvage some nozzles from the industrial equipment at the old factory. Also, I have a stash of ceramic insulation that might handle the heat. While they brainstormed, a series of small explosions rumbled in the distance, followed by the piercing glow of alien plasma beams. Over the radio, Mr. Stan's voice crackled. They're clearing the old airstrip. We got pinned down by a squad of them. They're wearing heated armor that shrugs off normal bullets. Laser guns or something are cutting through metal like butter. We had to pull back. Logan took a steadying breath. We're going to have to go bigger, muttered. He glanced over at Becca, who was frantically scribbling additional chemical formulas. She nodded in agreement. Morning dawned on a scene that looked more like a conflict zone than a cheerful festival. The aliens had established a small encampment by the airstrip, complete with a shimmering generator that seemed to produce intense waves of heat. Some sections of the desert floor were turned to glass where they tested their weapons. Rumor spread that a high-ranking alien, Overseer Cinder Prime, had arrived to command the operation. Logan and Becca scouted from a safe ridge, peering through binoculars. They saw the Pyronex loading large canisters, possibly containing their plasma fuel. A row of slender towers rose around the camp's perimeter, each adorned with coils that radiated a faint, menacing glow. They're definitely preparing for something big, Becca whispered, chewing on the edge of her lip. If they deploy those towers in town, they might roast everything within range. Logan frowned. We have to stop them before it gets that far. Let's gather everyone for a strategy session. We can't just charge them blindly. The town council convened in the largest building that remained intact, a local bar and grill called the Flaming Horseshoe. Chairs were pulled together, people standing in clusters. The smell of smoke and fear hung in the air, mixing with leftover barbecue scents. The mayor looked pale but determined. We've got maybe a few hundred people willing to fight, and a scattering of homemade flame weapons. The police are out of their depth, and we haven't seen any sign that state or federal help is coming soon enough. Mr. Stan hobbled in, coughing from the lingering dust. They've got technology that seems built around heat, plasma, and a high tolerance for flame. But we've got something they don't. Becca raised an eyebrow. Which is? He gave a grim smile. Sheer, reckless creativity. And local pride, of course. Logan stood. I say we do a two-pronged plan. A defensive perimeter around Main Street using whatever barricades we can set up. Then we mount a strike on their airstrip camp. If we can sabotage their fuel or generator, we might cripple their entire invasion plan. The crowd murmured. Toby, the brush-clearing flamethrower wielder, nodded vigorously. I can lead a team on the perimeter. We know how to handle desert wildfires, so maybe we can redirect or control any big flames they throw our way. Rita agreed. And I'll help with building a bigger weapon. We need something that can match or outclass their plasma beams. I'm thinking a giant flamethrower, bigger than anything we've ever tried. Becca jumped in. I can tweak PyroSparkX for that. If we can figure out how to keep it stable in large quantities, we can have a chance at punching through their armor or even their ships. But it's risky. The mayor exhaled, her shoulders sagging. Risky is all we've got. Let's do it. Outside, hammered metal clanged as volunteers stacked scraps of sheet metal and old cars into improvised barricades. Households contributed anything that might help. Propane tanks from backyard grills, leftover fireworks from last year, even old paint thinner. The place was a chaotic workshop in broad daylight. People improvised in ways no one had ever seen. Mr. Stan supervised the heavy machinery. He directed a forklift to haul a rusted industrial tank from the defunct factory. We'll reinforce it, mount a nozzle, feed it with PyroSparkX, he explained. It'll spit fire so hot it might melt their entire camp. Becca meticulously prepared the stabilized version of her fuel, wearing goggles and thick gloves as she measured out chemicals in big plastic drums. Sweat trickled down her face. The desert sun was scorching enough without standing over open vats of chemicals. Logan, meanwhile, helped with final assembly, welding pipes and valves, and carefully testing the flamethrower's pilot mechanism. At midday, Overseer Cinderprime made a public announcement. The Pyronex placed small, hovering devices around town that amplified the Overseer's voice. The proud, almost regal tone rang out. People of this backward realm, you have one day to submit. Bring forth your leaders to the old airstrip, pledge loyalty to the Pyronex, or face incineration. We are the rightful masters of all flame. Defiance will only lead to ashes. Logan found himself gripping a spanner, so hard his knuckles whitened. Mister, Stan spat on the ground. So much for talk. Let's show them who truly understands fire. The day passed in a frenzy of final preparations. Some folks left town entirely, unwilling to risk an alien war. Others steeled themselves for the fight. Logan tested the new mega flamethrower near the outskirts, flipping a lever that caused a tremendous roar of chemical ignition. A column of white-hot fire soared 30 feet. Unfortunately, it also ruptured a minor valve, causing an explosion of sparks that sent everyone ducking. Rita cursed and quickly shut it down, while Becca jotted frantic notes. They needed to fix the instability if they were going to use it in actual combat. Night fell, and the desert air cooled slightly, though the tension in town felt hotter than ever. Word came from scouts that the Pyronex had begun sending out skirmish squads to encircle the roads. They moved with precision, scanning the desert with beams that turned sand to glass. The defenders knew that once the Pyronex launched their full assault, the result would be either a triumphant victory for El Fuego Springs or a smoldering ruin. Shortly before midnight, the townspeople gathered. Logan raised his voice in the hush. We stand here with homemade gear, up against an advanced alien race that believes they hold a monopoly on fire. But we all know the truth. Fire is in our blood, our heritage, and we'll show them what real humans can do when we decide to burn bright. If they think we're pushovers, they've got another thing coming. People nodded, some cheering. The murmur of determination spread through the group. A handful made last-minute checks on their unique inventions. A pressure cannon loaded with flaming oil, a large slingshot designed to hurl incendiary projectiles, and even a series of rickety drones outfitted with flammable gel. Everybody had something to contribute. It was a patchwork army, but it was their best shot. Logan, Becca, Rita, and Mr. Stan led a small strike team away from town, each driving a vehicle loaded with drums of Pyro-Spark X. Their mission: sabotage the alien camp at the old airstrip before the main confrontation. The rest of the defenders stayed to protect El Fuego Springs. Under the moonlight, the trucks rumbled across the desert. They parked behind a ridge. From that vantage, the alien encampment glowed with ominous heat. Towering spires belched steam. Patrols of Pyronex marched in rigid formation, scanning the area with thermal sensors. Rita spoke in a low voice. We blow up their fuel supply, or at least disable those spires. That'll buy us time. Mister. Stan nodded. We've got 4 canisters rigged to blow. We'll need to plant them strategically. Once they're set, get clear. Logan double-checked his custom flamethrower, testing the ignition and the pressure gauge. It hummed with an eagerness that matched the quickening of his heartbeat. Let's do it. The strike team split. Becca and Rita each carried a canister, creeping around the perimeter with the help of the cover provided by rocky outcroppings. Logan and Mr. Stan took the other side. As they navigated closer, the temperature rose. The alien spires radiated heat like mini volcanoes, warping the air with shimmering waves. Occasionally, a Pyronex soldier passed by, and the humans froze behind boulders, hearts pounding. On one close call, a soldier paused only a few yards away, raising a glowing gauntlet to scan the darkness. Logan held his breath, adrenaline surging until the soldier moved on. They placed the canisters near what looked like the main fuel silos, tall containers that hissed with some scalding fluid. Rita rigged a remote detonator. Before they could plant the final charge, an alarm blared. A swirling red beam shot into the sky from a watchtower, illuminating the area in a hellish glow. Over loudspeakers, a voice shouted, "Intruders! Secure the perimeter!" Pyronex soldiers began sprinting through the compound. Logan saw 3 of them headed in his direction. With no time to hide, he raised his flamethrower and unleashed a torrent of Pyro-Spark X. The resulting blast of intense, white-blue flame caught the aliens off guard, melting the outer layer of their armor. They staggered back, hissing in pain. One soldier managed to fire a plasma bolt that whizzed past Logan's head, leaving a sizzling dent in the desert floor. He ducked and rolled, firing again. This time, the blast hit them squarely, and they collapsed in a smoking heap. An explosion rocked the east side of the camp, signaling that Rita or Becca had been discovered. The entire facility erupted into chaos. Pyronex charged in every direction, shooting jets of superheated plasma. The humans scattered, weaving between spires. "Mister," Stan cursed under his breath as he slammed the last canister against the silo wall, punching the trigger to arm it. He gave Logan a wild grin. "That's a kid, time ago." They sprinted away, exchanging frantic calls on their radios. Rita's voice crackled. "We're pinned down by an alien patrol near the second spire." Logan pivoted, eyes scanning for a vantage point. He saw a series of crates that led to an elevated walkway overlooking that spire. "I'm heading to high ground," he growled into the mic. Scrambling up the crates, he found a catwalk. From there, he spotted a group of 6 Pyronex cornering Rita behind a half-collapsed wall. Their armor glowed menacingly. She was taking potshots with a small flamethrower, but they kept advancing. Logan took a steadying breath, then unleashed a burst of flame from above. The intense heat poured down like an infernal waterfall, catching the Pyronex by surprise. Their suits flared, and they yelled in their own language as they scattered. Rita darted away, bounding over debris to rejoin Becca. A moment later, both women regrouped with Logan on the catwalk. "Mister," Stan waved from below, yelling to hurry. The entire operation was seconds from meltdown. The 4 of them raced toward the edge of the camp, the desert looming ahead. Plasma bolts lit up the night. A direct hit struck the catwalk behind them, causing a deafening boom that hurled Logan off balance. He fell onto a dune, gasping for air, head spinning. Through the ringing in his ears, he heard Becca shouting his name. He forced himself to his feet and stumbled forward, ignoring the protesting ache in his limbs. They managed to pile into their trucks, engines roaring. A barrage of plasma hammered the vehicles, but they floored it, skidding across sand. "Mister," Stan bellowed, "blow the charges." Rita mashed the detonator. A split-second hush, then the desert lit up like the sun. The blast wave rattled the truck windows. Fireball after fireball erupted as the Pyronex fuel silos detonated in a chain reaction, turning the airstrip encampment into a conflagration of twisted metal. Even from miles away, the glow was visible. Back in El Fuego Springs, watchers on rooftops cheered at the sight of the distant explosions, some letting out loud whoops of excitement. But the victory was short-lived. As dawn came, new shapes appeared in the sky, much larger vessels descending, blotting out the morning sun. Word spread that the Pyronex were furious and had called in their main force, led by Overseer Cinder Prime himself. In the heart of the battered town, everyone braced for the final battle. The defenders had salvaged enough gear to hold a semi-coherent line. Barricades stretched across Main Street. Fire-retardant foam canisters were stacked behind them, ready to create smoke screens or traps. High on a repurposed construction vehicle stood the mega flamethrower, now reinforced with extra shielding. Becca had balanced the chemical mix to reduce the risk of catastrophic backfire, but the entire contraption still threatened to blow if handled improperly. Overseer Cinder Prime made his entrance with theatrical menace. The Pyronex flagship hovered just outside town limits, carving tall shadows across the desert floor. A ramp lowered, and from it emerged ranks of alien warriors in glinting red-hot armor, flanked by towering quadrupedal machines bristling with vents and pipes that spat jets of molten material. At the center of them all, Cinder Prime wore regalia that pulsed with internal flame, his helmet crowned with spines that shimmered in the scorching wind. He stepped forward, scanning the battered but unyielding barricades. His voice, amplified by alien technology, boomed across El Fuego Springs. Insolent creatures. You destroyed a portion of our supply. Do you think that grants you victory? The Pyrenees have conquered 1,000 worlds. We have marched through volcanoes that burned hotter than your feeble attempts. Surrender now, and perhaps we will spare the children. Otherwise, your ashes will feed the cinders. Mayor Rodriguez, standing with a microphone behind the barricade, responded, "We're not surrendering a single inch of our homes, you walking furnace. This is El Fuego Springs. You picked the wrong place to flaunt your so-called mastery of fire." The crowd behind her erupted in defiant cheers. Cinder Prime made a dismissive gesture, and a hail of plasma beams soared from the Pyrenees ranks. The defenders ducked behind their metal barriers. Logan and Mr. Stan positioned themselves in the line of battered trucks, returning fire with handheld flamethrowers that belched columns of scorching flame. For a few moments, the desert air shimmered with clashing energies. Alien plasma streaking in green arcs, human fire roaring in bright blues and oranges. One of the quadrupedal machines charged forward, spitting molten globs that sizzled on the barricades. Toby and his crew aimed a makeshift cannon loaded with superheated oil. They fired, and a roiling mass of liquid flame splashed across the machine's front legs. The metal hissed and buckled, forcing it to stumble. Cheers erupted, but the Pyrenees lines immediately returned heavier fire, forcing defenders to shield themselves as sparks flew. Becca barked into a radio, "We need the mega flamethrower up front." Rita had parked it behind a row of old shipping containers, waiting for the right moment. Now the truck-mounted monster rumbled into position, guided by Rita's steady hands and Logan's watchful eye. The contraption towered over the battlefield, welded plates shielding the massive fuel tank. A hush fell over defenders who'd never seen it in action. The plan was to concentrate its fury on the strongest threats, like Cinder Prime and his machines. "Fire!" Logan shouted. Rita turned the valve, unleashing Pyro-Spark X in a raging pillar of incandescence. It tore across the dusty street in a straight line, bathing an entire squad of Pyrenees in scorching flame. Their heated armor glowed white-hot, then began melting at the joints. Several alien warriors collapsed, and an entire tank-like vehicle was enveloped, its outer plating twisting and cracking under the intense heat. For a moment, it looked like the humans might have the upper hand. Then Cinder Prime raised his arms, and an immense wave of searing energy erupted from his armor, forming a swirling inferno that deflected the oncoming fire. He advanced, every step reverberating with power. The mega flamethrower's blast parted around his shield, as if he wore a vortex of roiling heat. A cluster of Pyrenees machines followed in his wake, fueling the protective barrier with their own fiery cores. Logan's jaw tightened. "We've got to breach the shield somehow. If we can't, he'll walk right through us." Becca's voice shook as she answered, "The only way is to overload the heat beyond what even they can handle. That means pushing Pyro-Spark X to its absolute limit, or combining it with something just as extreme." "Mister," Stan let out a weary laugh. "I've got a little idea. We've been saving it for brush fires out in the ranchlands, a special compound that forms a chain reaction with enough heat. We call it thermobloom. It basically doubles the intensity of any flame it touches." Becca's eyes lit up. "If we coat the mega flamethrower output with thermobloom, we might be able to pierce that shield. But that is incredibly dangerous. The nozzle could clog, or the tank could blow." Logan clenched his teeth. "We don't have another option. Load it up." Under constant barrage from alien plasma, they positioned the mega flamethrower behind a row of steel plating. A forklift hurriedly transported a canister labeled with bright red hazard symbols. "Mister." Stan rigged a feed line into the main nozzle, hooking it up with grim concentration. Sparks danced around them as stray shots struck the barricade. Explosions shook the ground, and thick smoke filled the air. Across the street, Cinder Prime's unstoppable march continued, a living inferno surrounded by machines spewing molten destruction. With trembling hands, Rita engaged the mixture. Logan took the controls, bracing himself. He breathed in, tasting the acrid air that stung his eyes and throat. When he pressed the trigger, the device groaned, the fuel lines rattling with lethal potential. Then the flame erupted, bigger and brighter than any they had produced before, the color shifting to a dazzling white tinged with deep violet. Even from behind the shields, the defenders felt a wave of blistering heat roll over them. The column of fire slammed into Cinder Prime's vortex, and for a moment, it seemed the two infernos were locked in a standoff. Overhead, the sky boiled with shimmering heat. Then the thermal bloom took effect. The vortex began to waver, cracks forming in that swirling barrier of flame. Cinder Prime hissed in surprise. The machines around him stuttered, their own vents going haywire under the sheer onslaught. In a last, desperate surge, Logan twisted the throttle all the way, channeling every drop of Pyro-Spark X laced with thermobloom. The roar was deafening. The brilliant flames speared through the vortex, striking Cinder Prime's armor with a violent burst that peeled away layers of alloy. He staggered, forced back step by step. The Watchers cheered, thinking it might be enough to destroy him. But even as his armor cracked and glowed, the Overseer refused to fall. With a guttural cry, he unleashed one more pulse of pyro energy, snapping the flaming column off to one side. The backlash slammed into the mega flamethrower's housing. A high-pitched shriek erupted from the fuel lines, a telltale sign of overpressure. "Shut it down! Shut it down!" Becca screamed. Logan yanked the emergency valve, but it was too late. The side of the tank ruptured, sending him flying off the platform. The vehicle erupted in a plume of chemical fire, catapulting metal shards through the air. Rita and Mr. stand up for cover, coughing in the thick black smoke. Logan crashed onto the road, disoriented. His ears rang, and his muscles ached. Through blurred vision, he saw Cinder Prime also on one knee, armor buckling. The alien overlord's breathing was ragged, his chest plate glowing a dull, flickering red. Alien machines sputtered around him, some toppling. A wave of panic spread among the Pyronex ranks. Their unstoppable commander was crippled, even if not fully defeated. The human defenders rallied, releasing a barrage of homemade flamethrowers and cannons. Pyronex squads retreated behind the burning husks of their vehicles, uncertain now that their leader was wounded. Logan wiped soot from his eyes. He forced himself upright, ignoring the pain in his shoulder, searching for a makeshift weapon. The remains of a small flamethrower lay nearby, the nozzle intact. He grabbed it, tested the trigger. A feeble spark ignited. Good enough. He stumbled toward Cinder Prime, determined to finish this. Cinder Prime looked up as Logan approached. He tried to raise his arms, but his suit malfunctioned, sputtering with half-dead flames. "You worthless mortal. You dare stand against the Pyronex? We have burned civilizations older and mightier than yours." Logan's lips curled into a faint, grim smile. "Well, maybe they didn't appreciate the art of fire quite like we do." He squeezed the trigger, pouring a stream of flame into the cracks in Cinder Prime's armor. The Overseer screamed, the once proud glow in his eyes flaring and then fading to darkness. The giant form slumped over, liquid metal dripping from the battered plating. From the looming flagship, sirens sounded. A retreat order was broadcast in frantic Pyronex speech. Their forces scrambled back, dragging wounded comrades, while the battered quadrupedal machines slunk behind the cover of swirling dust. An ominous rumble filled the air as thrusters flared, and the flagship rose, fleeing into the brightening sky. The Watchers in El Fuego Springs could hardly believe it. They coughed in the residue of smoke, sweat, and adrenaline, gazing at the receding alien craft. Their battered town lay in ruins, streets torn up, buildings scorched, but the invaders were withdrawing. Silence fell, broken only by the crackle of dying flames and the distant whine of the Pyronex engines. Then a roar of celebration erupted. People cheered, embraced, laughed, some of them sobbing in disbelief. They had stood against an alien might that prided itself on the mastery of flame, and they had won, albeit at a staggering cost. Mayor Rodriguez emerged from behind a barricade, covered in soot but alive. She took a shaky breath, her voice trembling as she addressed the crowd. El Fuego Springs, we did it. God help us, we actually did it. Applause and whoops exploded in reply. Mister. Stan limped over to Logan, who was slumped against a broken piece of the mega Flamethrower's frame. You all right, kid? Logan winced, pressing a hand to his bruised ribs. I think so. I might have to retire from building giant flamethrowers for a week or two, though. Becca rushed up, concern etched on her grimy face. She knelt beside him, scanning him for serious injuries. You lunatic, she breathed, voice unsteady. That was the craziest thing I've ever seen. But you did it. You took him down. Rita stood nearby, shaking her head at the wreckage. We lost the rig, she muttered, mourning the battered remains of their mega flamethrower. Then a small grin tugged at her lips. But we found out that they're not the only ones who can master fire. The next day was a blur of recovery. Volunteers and exhausted townsfolk tended the wounded, patched up burnt skin, and salvaged materials from the destroyed vehicles. The once celebratory festival grounds were a blackened field of twisted metal and scattered debris. Still, in the midst of sorrow over the destruction, relief and pride swept through everyone. They had defended their home against an overwhelming foe. News reporters arrived by helicopter, stunned by the devastation. They expected to find a scene of hopeless carnage. Instead, they encountered a defiant, dusty, soot-covered population that insisted on finishing Flame Fest, albeit in a far more subdued manner. Cameras panned over the battered barricades and broken spires of alien technology. Interviews with exhausted but elated citizens revealed a story so bizarre it verged on the unbelievable. A small desert town stared down a technologically advanced alien race by wielding improvised flamethrowers and unwavering grit. Word spread that the Pyronex flagship had left Earth's orbit. NASA apparently detected some message traffic from the alien craft, presumably warnings to avoid this planet of deranged, fire-wielding maniacs. Officials in state and federal government rushed to El Fuego Springs, too late to be of any real help but eager to investigate. Scientists arrived, drooling at the prospect of studying leftover alien debris. Military personnel roamed the perimeter, gawking at the lumps of molten metal fused into the street. The mayor rolled her eyes at the sudden interest. Where were they when we were lighting these creatures up? She muttered. By the end of that week, the residents decided to commemorate their victory in the most El Fuego Springs manner possible, with a giant bonfire. People gathered with scraps, splintered furniture, and even pieces of alien hull plating that weren't too toxic. They built a towering pyre in the middle of a cleared lot. As twilight fell, Logan and Becca, bruised, bandaged, but smiling, stood side by side at the base of the structure. Mister. Stan stood with them, arms crossed. The entire town counted down from 10. On 1, they ignited the pile. Flames roared upward, illuminating the night sky. A hush fell over the crowd. Even the reporters who still lingered grew silent. The fire crackled and spat embers into the air, and its warmth reminded them of the absurd reality they had endured. Logan spoke up, raising his voice so everyone could hear. We call this bonfire a reminder. Fire isn't something to fear. It's something to respect, to harness, to love if you're crazy enough. The Pyronex thought they alone knew how to wield it. They were wrong. We showed them that humanity can use fire for creation, for celebration, and, if necessary, for defense. So let this flame burn for every victory we've earned and every friend we've lost. A round of applause and cheers erupted. People wiped tears from their eyes, remembering the neighbors who had fled or were recovering from burns. They embraced the fact that, for better or worse, they had sealed the fate of El Fuego Springs as a place that aliens would think twice before invading again. A few days later, as life began to assume a semblance of normalcy, Logan and Becca found themselves in front of what remained of Mr. Stan's workshop. The roof was partially caved in, and half the tools were melted lumps. Still, Mr. Stan was there, sorting salvageable gear with a determined look. He waved them over. "So, what's next for you two pyro-lunatics?" Becca smirked. "I have a couple of job offers already. Turns out the government's real interested in my pyro-spark formulas. But I'm not sure I'm ready to hand over the secrets after what we've been through." "Mister." Stan set down a scorched toolbox. "Fair enough. And you, Logan?" Logan shrugged, trying not to wince at his still sore ribs. "I guess I'll help rebuild around here. Maybe see if we can piece together some of that alien tech. Or maybe I'll focus on safer pursuits, like balloon animals," he joked, earning a laugh from both Becca and Mister. "Stan." Becca wiped her brow. "We do deserve a break. A normal, everyday sort of break." Logan nodded. "I just hope that, somewhere out in the galaxy, the Pyroneks are sitting around telling stories about how they messed with the wrong planet." "Mister." Stan chuckled. "Well, if they come back, we'll be ready. Maybe next time we can build something even bigger and more stable, if that's possible." Together, the three of them picked up their welding torches, stepping into the half-destroyed workshop. Sparks soon flew, forging new beginnings in the wreckage of the old. And though the fear of another attack would never fully vanish, neither would the undeniable bond of a town that had united under impossible odds, forging victory in the crucible of fire. That evening, the last few straggling reporters packed up their vans. One of them shouted to Logan, "Hey, are you guys some new kind of alien fighting division or something?" Logan paused mid-step, looking over his shoulder. He smiled and answered, "We're just a bunch of folks who refuse to let anyone claim they're the only masters of fire. Not on our watch." The reporter chuckled. "I'm sure the rest of the country's thankful for that. Good luck, man." As the sun dipped below the distant mountains, Logan gazed out at the horizon. A tinge of orange and red painted the sky, as if nature herself was tipping her hat to El Fuego Springs. He remembered the swirling flames, the ear-splitting explosions, the heated standoff with Cinder Prime. The memory was still raw, but also strangely empowering. They had shown the universe that humans could be every bit as fierce as any self-declared overlord of flame. Down the road, someone launched a celebratory firecracker, a leftover from the festival. It popped in the twilight, casting dancing sparks that fizzled down to earth. Logan shook his head with a grin. He could already hear folks around town calling for next year's festival to be bigger than ever, joking about how they might set aside a special booth for alien incineration exhibitions. The sense of humor here was irrepressible, perhaps the greatest protection the town had. He walked slowly toward Becca's makeshift chemistry station, the desert wind swirling dust around his ankles. She had relocated her gear outside the workshop for safety, mixing smaller test batches of Pyro-Spark X. She waved him over. "I'm working on a safer version," she explained, swirling a beaker of translucent fluid. "I figure if we ever do open up negotiations with friendlier extraterrestrials, we might want to have something a little less lethal. Or maybe I'm just tired of everything exploding." Logan laughed softly. "Less lethal could be nice. Although, around here, we might call that boring." Becca rolled her eyes. "Don't tempt fate. We've had enough excitement for a lifetime." Silence stretched between them, comfortable and warm. The sky turned from orange to purple, the stars peeking through one by one. In that hush, they could almost pretend the invasion had been just a bizarre dream. But the scars on the town and the battered suits of Pyroneks armor lying in heaps proved otherwise. Eventually, Becca spoke. "You know, they thought they mastered fire." Logan gave a sardonic nod. "Until they saw a human flamethrower." They both laughed, a quiet and weary sound. The truth was the Pyroneks had discovered what it really meant to wield fire among humans, an unpredictable blend of ingenuity, stubbornness, and raw nerve. If the aliens had learned one lesson, it was that Earth was anything but docile. By the time the moon rose high, the two friends finished cleaning up. The desert night cooled, carrying away the sharpest edges of the day's heat. Logan placed a tarp over the new gear. Tomorrow, they would continue sorting the wreckage, help with town repairs, and maybe pass out for sheer exhaustion. But for now, they could rest in the knowledge that, regardless of what the cosmos might send their way, El Fuego Springs would stand united, flamethrowers in hand. At the edge of the ruins, a battered sign still proclaimed "Welcome to Flame Fest," celebrating the power of fire. Half the letters were scorched and unreadable, but there was no mistaking the message burning in every heart that called this place home. Fire was not something to be subdued by any one species. It was a raucous, dancing partner that chose no master, and it thrived best where the courageous and the creative dared to stoke its flames. Logan lingered there, reading the half-burnt sign in the moonlight. He thought of the Pyrenex, speeding away in defeat, perhaps to nurse their wounds and question everything they believed about dominion over flame. He thought of the unstoppable vortex that Cinder Prime had conjured, shattered by an insane combination of Pyrospark X and Thermobloom. It was surreal that a tiny town on Earth could overpower an advanced civilization. But then again, most Pyrenex worlds hadn't been crazy enough to hold a festival dedicated to launching homemade flamethrowers and blasting rockets into the desert sky. A faint grin crossed his lips. "We're nothing if not persistent," he muttered under his breath. The breeze carried away his words, scattering them into the quiet, star-swept darkness. Yes, the Pyrenex had come claiming mastery of fire. Yet they left with scorched armor and a lesson they'd never forget. Because in El Fuego Springs, humans had shown them just how fiercely and creatively that element could burn in mortal hands. And for those who might be foolish enough to return, well, the door was always open. They just better be ready for one hell of a hot welcome.